very much. Thank you very much, Nils, and the opportunity to be your CCS girlfriend is something I very much welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really enjoyed the intervention preceding mine, and it's liberating to have such a focus on costs and how we can realize carbon capture and sequestration, because if we don't, we will struggle to get the overall license to proceed, as it were, from voters, from politicians, and for the necessary funds required to realize the next steps. We have to talk about money. But I will deviate from your approach on two dimensions. I will talk about the other emissions, the industrial emissions, and the emissions from the management of waste, incineration of waste. And I will also focus on the fact that, separate from the many problems and tensions that we have within the triangle of environment, climate, and energy production, we have this big sector of emissions of CO2 from industrial production and waste incineration that needs to be addressed fully and head-on. And even if there were no emissions of greenhouse gases from energy production at all, we would still need to address industrial emissions. And secondly, I'd like to share with you that if we look at the development of the world that runs in parallel with our scenarios for climate mitigation, climate change mitigation, there is the development that more and more people live in cities. And more people will want to live in cities, and more countries will want their people to live in cities. Now, if you go back 30, 40 years, the centralization and urbanization was not necessarily considered helpful. It's considered helpful to have people live more spread out. But as the population of the world grows from 7 billion to 8, 9, 10, expected to plateau at 11 billion, we need to be able to manage our natural resources to have people live more centrally. You have to build taller buildings to reduce the use of acreage. You have to make people live close together to make the infrastructure of societies be efficient. That's why the issue of managing waste is going to be critical to be able to realize urban society centralization and to make sure that we succeed with our circular economy objectives. So I will bring you the example of Fortum Oslo Varme, which is a joint venture between Oslo Municipality and the Finnish corporation Fortum, which is very much currently focusing on urban city solutions. And this picture demonstrates how it works when you have a waste incineration plant to your left, and that heat is being fed into a district heating system whereby heated water will provide heat for buildings and businesses, and indeed it's possible to also bring heating to all ships that dock at ports. And this is a societal, it's a community solution, it's not an individual solution. So to use a district heating system, which is taking the benefit from the heat produced from waste incineration, is one way of protecting an asset and benefiting from something which would otherwise be wasted and just heating the air. But it's also clearly better than individual solutions, whereby each individual house has a heater or a cooler with both the cost and with the lack of structure and efficiency. So community solutions are required to succeed with urban societies. The company Fortum is strong in the Nordics, both in power production, heat sales, and for customers for electricity. And Fortum is one of the bigger providers of electricity to electrical vehicles in the Nordics. But there is power production and and waste incineration in Poland, the Baltics, and indeed in Russia, India, where there is solar production, and Fortum is also building the first waste incineration plant in Jakarta, Indonesia, which is really an example of how waste, which is not being managed and incinerated, will be at risk of strangling urban areas. The joint venture structure between Fortum and Oslo Municipality is also because of the strong push in Oslo to make sure that the city reduces its carbon footprint. And with Oslo being the environmental capital of Europe in 2019, the waste-to-energy carbon capture project is very much at the top of the agenda. And other speakers have addressed the size of how the future carbon capture contribution from Norway can impact the whole of North Europe. You will see that there is the option of using the Norwegian continental shelf as storage space for CO2, which is being produced not only in Norway, but in North Europe. And other speakers will speak to this in more detail. Our focus is to commend the Norwegian government and its representatives, Gassnova, Climate, all the tools that are being used to also support the demonstration of the capture of CO2 to make sure there's a full value chain. So the plant, which is the biggest in Norway, is a regular waste-to-energy plant that produces energy and district heating from the incineration of waste. And note that the simple fact of collecting waste is helpful in terms of CO2 emissions because you take the diffuse emission from thousands small sources and you collate them at one point and you get one big point of emission whereby you are set to address the need to reduce the emissions directly from one source and one chimney. The waste-to-energy plant at Klemetsrud, owned by Fortum Oslo Varme, has had this project for some time. It will be able to capture 400,000 CO2 per year, and it will remove not only the fossil fuel emissions, but also biogenic CO2, which is extremely important because in all scenarios, not only CCS, as said by previous speakers, but also to be able to do bio-CCS is required if we are going to reach the targets. The CO2 will be captured from the emission of flue gas from the waste incineration, and then it will be transported to port to be brought by ship to storage on the Norwegian continental shelf. The objective is to capture approximately 90% of the CO2 of the emissions, and we use the technology supplier that has proven its metal, Shell, that is currently the technology supplier to Boundary Dam, which is a large CCS plant in Canada. Many point to the fact that there have been technological issues and startup problems at that site. This is true. This is why we like them, because they've done their mistakes. And when they come to us, they've learned from them. And we believe the helpfulness in having somebody who's done this before full scale is considerable. In addition, though, it's important also to verify that it works on the specific flue gas at Klemetsrud. And that's why we have set up a pilot testing, an idea which makes a lot of sense, supported by our backers, and that also shows that we've been able to verify how the CO2 can be captured from this particular flue gas at the waste incineration plant, and we already managed recently to reach the 2,000-hour tests to complete the first part. The focus for the test pilot has been to see how the emissions are being captured and to make sure that we understand the specifics of the flue gas. And secondly, to make sure we understand the amine degradation. As many of you in the room will know, this is of course a chemical process, and that's a process which is alive, which means that you can make your projections, but in real life the curve is not necessarily straight. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, is that we need a waste revolution. This is what it looks like all over the world. And it's not only ugly and sad and stinking, but it's a huge problem, not only for people, but for the issue of climate change. That's because today 2.2 billion tons of waste is produced, and the pace, the increase of production, as it were, of waste is frightening. We will see a doubling of waste production towards 2025. And by far, the main way of dealing with waste worldwide is landfill and waste dumps. And they cause large diffuse methane emissions. And to incinerate waste is by far the best solution for the waste, not all of it, but all the waste that remains after you have done recycling that makes sense. And the point is, when I say recycling that makes sense, not everything should be recycled, not everything can be recycled, but there is a lot that can be done in terms of recycling, and it has to be done. And anyone who is in waste incineration is rooting for recycling. These are not opposing views. But, ladies and gentlemen, the circular economy cannot succeed if we blindly believe that zero waste is a viable option, because it's not. That is an illusion, and it's a dangerous illusion, because it will produce flawed politics. If we believe that zero waste is possible, it's not possible. There will be residual waste, and it needs to be incinerated, full stop. So this is the illustration of how waste to energy can be so important in terms of climate change in Europe. There is a clear policy push to get rid of waste dumps, and they are likely to be banned in Europe shortly. There are 450 waste-to-energy plants that are incinerating waste already today in Europe. All of them are, in my book, candidates for carbon capture and storage. And if all of them were taken aboard with carbon capture and storage, that would have a material effect on emissions in Europe. There are still a large number of landfills, 500,000, small and large, and that's why landfill directive has been tabled, which will ban landfills. This means, as you heard the minister say today, that the Norwegian government will support carbon capture projects provided it has a positive effect, or as the lingo goes, benefit realization. That means that this should not be the only plant, because if the Norwegian government funds 2 plants and there are no more, it's a failure. It has to bring about and trigger more facilities, and the easy way out is really to look at the waste to energy business, because it sits there and is ready to go. It's a great potential. You will see that the coloring is the recycling, is the green part, the waste to energy is the yellow part, and the red is the landfill. You'll see all the way on your right, the green circle is Norway, and all the way to the right next to it is Iceland. You see there is very little landfill in Norway, but it means it is very apt solution for Norway to go into that fairly large amount of waste to energy plants and to realize it. But more importantly, all of these European countries, and there are a number of Central European, South European countries that have a huge part of their column as a red landfill. And the volume, ladies and gentlemen, is critical to make this commercially sustainable. And the whole value chain relies upon not only having a waste to energy plant, preferably another industrial project as well, to make sure we have long-term reliable feedstock and a volume that will serve the infrastructure, Northern Lights, which will be presented later on today, which will bring the CO2 for storage. And to do this and to accept a model whereby you are exposed on having just one source and a small-ish source, it's not a good idea. So the waste to energy is very much part of the climate solution, ladies and gentlemen. Fortum has the slogan, join the change, and it just goes to show that there is no choice but to actually move forward. It's a complex picture. It's a picture that includes a lot of difficult issues, including energy production, climate, and environmental issues. However, it is, in my best opinion, a lower threshold to start out with the industrial point emissions, prove the technology. By all means, do a stepwise, incremental approach, which makes a lot of sense, but to make sure that you can prove that this is working and that it will serve the purpose. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
So, Liv Monica, thanks a lot. Small gift for you as well.
Thank you, Nils.
Yeah.